Thanks everyone for coming. We're going to get started. First, I know there's a number of boards and committees here. If any of you haven't called yourselves to order, why don't you do that now? All set? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thanks. I'm Bob Lurlasher, the town manager. Thanks for coming out. Found a place of warmth in a cold night. It'll warm your heart even more when we start talking about zoning, one of everyone's favorite topics. Almost 4 years ago, staff started asking to have a real serious relook at the zoning bylaws. They had originated apparently sometime in the early 1920s and had many iterations and changes since then. And Mr. Brown has the original one, of course, with him. And as anything that evolves over time, it's gotten very complex and convoluted. And if you have a specific issue or question, you can probably find at least 2 answers for most questions somewhere in the zoning bylaws. So it's clear both from a resident and business perspective, but also from a staff perspective, that it was really time to look at them and at least clean them up and make them make sense. But beyond that, it also seemed like a good opportunity to really reach out to the community and find out what works and what doesn't work. Reading has changed quite a bit, even in the last 5 years, let alone way back to the 20s and 40s when things were really developed. So we have a current project underway. Consultant VHB is here. We have some staff members. Jean Delios is the assistant town manager. Jessie Wilson's, yep, she's back there, as the community development administrator. We're here to help answer your questions, and after a presentation of about 20 or 30 minutes, we really want to hear from you. This is the first in the series of 9 more months of public outreach, so if you don't get something in tonight, there'll be plenty of other opportunities. The Zoning Advisory Committee, as Marcy mentioned, is meeting probably about 20 times over this period of time that it's studied, and they would always welcome you. There's at least 4 public forums such as this set up specifically on the calendar, and we'll see if we need to add more. We'll also get your input. And I know VHB is going to reach out and do some focus groups with some of you. It's terrific we had a turnout tonight. There's no telling what kind of group you might get. But there's many ways in which you can respond and contribute. And I'll conclude by saying it's really important that you do contribute. This is your opportunity. Don't come back in a year or 2 and say, I wish that this had happened, if you didn't say it happened. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to, you want to start with you?
Did you want to say anything, Dean?
No, I just wanted to say welcome everybody, and this is our first forum for the comprehensive update of the zoning bylaw. And it's a real, as Bob said, real opportunity to take a look at what's working, what's not working, what do we need to add, what do we need to subtract. And we're very pleased that town meeting authorized funding for us to hire a consultant that specializes in this. And I'm very pleased to introduce tonight Ralph Wilmer from VHB, who's going to walk us through what this project's all about. Thank you.
I should also just add quickly that the objective of this, the time frame of this, is a year from now, next November town meeting. We intend to bring to that town meeting whatever changes come out of this group. So that's why I say you have 9 months through next summer to really get all the input, and that's how it's going to work.
Thank you. And I too would like to thank you for filling the room tonight. It doesn't always happen with zoning discussions. So, what is zoning? Zoning has been around for a while. It has been around for a while here in Reading. And basically, it's a set of regulations that determine what land use can occur in what place around town. There's a zoning map that goes along with it. There's a copy of the zoning map there. And the town is divided into a variety of different districts, and those district regulations tell you what you can or cannot do in terms of land use within those different districts. So it determines where different uses occur, under what circumstances. Things that are regulated are like buffer zones between different uses, setbacks in terms of the front, side, and rear of the building, building height, density, how many dwelling units can be built in a certain area, usually defined on a per acre basis. What the parking regulations are, how many parking spaces are required for different land uses. Signs are also regulated under zoning bylaw. So your zoning bylaw is about 150, 170 pages, and it's just chock full of all sorts of regulations, some better than others and some older than others. And I'll go through why we're going through this process now. But also, some of the zoning comes out of the previous planning efforts that the town has undertaken, and new regulations, changes to the zoning bylaw have been enacted to implement the recommendations of those planning documents. And the legality of zoning goes way back to about the same year that Reading first adopted a zoning bylaw in 1926, when the Supreme Court upheld the validity of zoning bylaws to do these kinds of things. The basic premise is to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So, why do we need zoning? These are just two examples. What it says here is, what a beautiful spot to build some kind of eyesore. And on the right-hand side, we talk about incompatible uses, and we have a crocodile farm right next to a skydiving school. So those are the kinds of things that we want to try to avoid with an updated zoning bylaw. So, why are we doing the rezoning now? As has been mentioned a few times, the zoning bylaw is old. It has been updated from time to time, but only on a piecemeal basis. So this is really the first time that the Reading bylaw has been updated in a comprehensive way. So a lot has changed in 90 some odd years. Land use patterns have changed, economic development, housing, all of those things have changed, and the zoning needs to keep up with current needs, anticipated land use changes, and so on and so forth. There's a lack of some of the modern zoning tools and techniques that a lot of other communities are doing to achieve their goals, whether it's dealing with residential development or landscaping or building design, things along those lines. So we want to try and modernize the bylaw to do that. The fact that it has been revised in a piecemeal basis for the last X number of years has made it confusing. There are internal inconsistencies. We have definitions in there that are words that are defined in a couple of different ways in different places. There are inconsistencies with state law. There's inconsistencies with statutory law, case law. So all of these things have to be brought to bear. And when I say it's confusing for everyone. Developers and project applicants don't know exactly what applies. It's difficult for the town to administer, to issue the permits, and it's difficult for the average citizen to really understand what's allowed in and around his or her neighborhood. So we want to, part of this is really just a cleanup effort. We're going to reorganize the format of the bylaw and try and find ways to make it simpler. One way to do that might be to use illustrations to show what is meant by the words in the bylaw. There are a lot of out-of-date policies and procedures, so we want to bring those up to date. There's some old, irrelevant land use classifications, so there's some sections that will probably be deleted, others that will be changed. Another example of this is that the parking regulations are also somewhat old and archaic and don't reflect the way land uses have their parking demands now. So we want to try and modernize things along those lines as well. I mentioned that it's not current with the legal requirements under Massachusetts state zoning law. And then we want to try and modernize it also with more environmental sustainable practices, some design standards so that people can look and see buildings that they appreciate seeing, whether it's in their downtown area or preserving the neighborhood character in the residential area where they live, things along those lines. So the project goals are to simplify simplify, clarify, and update the bylaw, as I've mentioned, making it consistent with state and local planning policies. We're going to look at your current planning documents, such as your master plan, your housing plan, your open space plan, pick things from those documents that have relevance to the zoning code and make sure that those policies are implemented through this new bylaw. There are areas where we want to strengthen the language. We want to review some of the recently updated sections and make sure that they mesh well with the rest of the bylaw. There's going to be some clarification of existing language, and there's probably going to be new sections added, in part because we're going to add new standards, but in part because also we're going to be doing some reorganization of the bylaw itself. We're going to evaluate the specific zoning districts and sections. There are a lot of land uses that are identified in the use regulation section of the bylaw, and we have two issues there. One is that there's probably some uses listed there that are no longer relevant. You know, we don't build those things anymore. And on the flip side, there are things in the bylaw, there are land uses that should be added so that we can reflect what's the kind of development that's happening now around the country. And then finally, looking for ways to improve the permitting process so it's a little bit more predictable, it's easier for the applicants, and easier for the town to administer and deal with the process. So we heard a little bit about what we're doing and how we're doing it, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. As has been mentioned, this is the first public forum for this project. There will be more. So we're in the initial phase of work. We're doing our initial assessment of the bylaw. The town has done some work in terms of thinking about ways to reformat the bylaw. They've looked at some of the definitions, and so we're following up on that work and building on it. So we are doing outreach to different stakeholders and to town officials. So I've developed a questionnaire that I've sent to a variety of businesses, attorneys, engineers, town officials. I've interviewed some people either on the phone or in person. I'm going to continue to do that to get input from people who really use the bylaw so that I can understand what kinds of issues and concerns they have. We did a first draft of a zoning diagnostic which identified about 36 different issues so far that we're going to address in the zoning update and revision. There may be more. We're going to flesh that out a little bit more. We've set up a project website, and I'll give you the web address for that shortly. But that'll be a way where you can keep informed about meetings. You can keep informed about what the Zoning Advisory Committee is doing. You can see drafts of the bylaw changes as they're developed. And there's going to be some additional background material in there as well, like the zoning map and the existing bylaw and things along those lines. A 7-person zoning advisory committee has been established. We've met a couple of times, and it's been mentioned, they have a pretty busy and ambitious meeting schedule between now and next July. Part of those meetings will be work sessions in which I will be coming to the meeting and going over specific sections of the bylaw to try and talk about the different changes, what the options are for changing for the bylaw, and just going through our own internal decision-making process as to how we want to proceed with the redraft. And then we're going to go through the process of drafting the bylaw section by section. And at each milestone, we'll have additional public forums so that we can continue to get input from you and others about the work that's been done on a periodic basis. And I have a brief schedule that I'll go through with you as well. But first I wanted to highlight some of the issues on the zoning diagnostic. For the purposes of tonight, we tried to highlight our top 10 list. I guarantee you this will not be anywhere near as humorous as David Letterman's top 10 list. But just to give you some of the thoughts that we have thus far, there may be other ideas or issues that you come up with tonight, and I can tell you whether or not we've already thought about them, but we're assuming that we'll be hearing some new things tonight as well. But we want to make sure that the intent and the regulatory language in the bylaw is clarified. There are sections of the bylaw that don't have a purpose section, for instance. That's important to sort of lay the groundwork for people's understanding of what is intended by that particular section of the bylaw. I already mentioned we want to update the definitions. What I frequently find is that there's some words that are in a bylaw that are only shown in the definition section, which leads me to believe, why are we defining it if it's only in the definition section? So we envision that we'll delete some definitions, we will update others, we will clarify others, and we're going to add a bunch of definitions for terms that are not defined at the moment. We're going to revise the use regulations. So within each of the zoning districts, we're going to try and update and modernize the list of uses that are allowed by right, by special permit, or those that shouldn't be allowed in the districts. We want to ensure that there's consistency in terminology, just in terms of some of the way the land uses are referred to. It's one word is used in one section and another word is used in a different section, but they mean the same thing. So we're going to clarify that. We want to explain the differences between the various overlay districts and the underlying zoning. You have several overlay districts, so we want to clarify that. We recommend rewriting the site plan review section. This is more of a legal issue, but it's a significant legal issue. Revise and clarify the planned unit development section. It's a section that appears to be used a lot, but we want to make sure that it's clarified and a little bit more user-friendly. I think user-friendly is sort of the overall general term that we want to try and get out of this whole process. We're going to update the sign section. This is another section that almost always lags behind the times. It probably doesn't reflect the kinds of modern sign technology that we're seeing now, and how should that be regulated? Revise the non-conforming uses and structures section. This is another legal issue that comes up almost every time I work on the zoning bylaw update. And then, as I alluded to earlier, we want to incorporate recommendations from recent plans that haven't been adopted yet. So in terms of the schedule, my next step is to work on the purpose and definition section of the bylaw. That'll be finished shortly. Then we're going to work on sections 3 and 4, which are the district and use regulations. That is scheduled to be finished in February, and after each of those milestone sections, we'll have another public forum that will focus specifically on what we propose to be changed in those particular sections. So after sections 3 and 4, there'll be another public forum. Then there'll be another public forum after we do sections 5 through 9, which include the dimensional regs, parking, signs. That's where a lot of the meat of the regulations are actually found. But it also includes some of the administrative stuff, like the process and procedures and roles of the various boards and commissions. Goal is to have a final draft of the bylaw revisions by July. We'll have to have a planning board public hearing, and then ultimately that will lead to presenting this at the fall town meeting of 2014. So what I want to do now is we have a series of questions that we want to ask, and we're going to use these electronic polling devices. So try and inject a little bit of fun into a zoning discussion. These will not work on the garage, they will not work on your TV, they will not work on this TV. It's going to be like this, other than to record your votes. You can vote as often as you want, but it's only going to record your last vote. So, everyone have a keypad? Okay, so we're going to start off with a couple of simple questions, and then we'll get into some questions to gauge your opinion on some zoning issues. So, the first question is, how long have you lived in Reading? Less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, more than 30, or vote number 7 if you don't live in Reading but you work here. So, you just push the number of your choice. And as long as you sort of point in the direction of the front of the room, it'll record your votes. And you might be able to see up in this corner here, I guess it's not showing on the TV screen, but in the upper right-hand corner, it's showing me how many people have voted. So 38 looks about like the right number of people. And okay, we have a few people who don't live here but work here. Most of the people have been here in the 21 to 30 range, but clearly we have, almost all the people in the audience have been here for more than 4 years. No one less than 1. So with the next question, we want to gauge what is your role in zoning in Reading, if any? Do you work in administration, permitting, or enforcement? Are you a developer, an attorney for applicants, an engineer for applicants, a business owner or manager, an attorney for citizen groups, or an engineer for citizen groups, or are you just an interested, I shouldn't say just, are you most importantly an interested citizen, or none of the above? That's an interested citizen.
No, we're just interested citizens.
Okay, has everyone voted? We
Oh, 37.
37.
38. There you go.
Okay, mostly interested citizens, but we have a few, probably town officials, and then some business owners. Okay. So, how do you prefer to get answers to your zoning questions? Do you go online to review the bylaw? Do you prefer to get a hard copy of the bylaw in front of you? Do you just call planning staff? Do you call the building inspector? Do you talk to someone on the Community Planning and Development Committee? Or do you contact a land use attorney or engineer for their expertise? Or some other, or it's not applicable because you don't, you haven't asked any questions about it.
Ralph, does this assume that we want to change something? What about?
No, right now, this question, if you have a question about zoning, how do you prefer to get your answer? Or if you have a, comment on it, but.
Or if you have trouble sleeping at night?
Yeah.
This is a tough one to answer because there are multiple options that you might try. You might
Right.
look at 1, do 3, and end up with 4 before you're done.
Which tells us something.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so most people first turn to the bylaw online, followed by reading a hard copy. And then we have a fair number who call the planning staff first as well. So. Okay, now with this one, we're asking, what are your 3 biggest concerns about Reading's zoning bylaw? With this one, you get to vote 3 times. So if you push your first one as your first choice, push second choice, and push a third choice, it'll record all 3. So is your biggest concern that it's confusing and hard to read? The permitting process is too complex? The zoning bylaw is outdated? Is it too permissive? The use table needs to be updated? You have concerns with specific sections? Recommendations from recent plans need to be incorporated? Or are you not sure? Or is there another category? Oh, am I in your way? Sorry. Everyone voted? One more maybe? Okay, it looks like confusing and hard to read. Permitting process is too complex and it's outdated. Seems to be the top 3 vote getters, with number 6 that people have concerns about specific sections. So you don't have to answer if you don't want, but for those people who voted either 6 or 8 that they're not sure, or had another option, does anyone want to say what they might have been thinking when they voted for either 6 or 8?
I'm concerned about the signage.
Okay.
You know, my biggest concern.
Okay, so that's one of the specific sections.
Section 4.8, which is the Aquifer Protection District.
Okay. So we have signs, section 4.8. In the back.
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know what section it is, but it's a part that certain areas are designated as wetlands and they're not.
Okay. So wetland designation.
Wetland,
Wetland Protection District.
Yeah.
Accessory use apartments.
Okay. Accessory apartments.
I don't know if it's the same thing, but I think it's time to take a look at whether or not it's time to allow a little bit some multi-families.
Okay. And we'll get into these in more detail when we do the discussion section, but I was just curious what you might have been thinking when you voted either 6 or 8.
A lot of it's a little too strict, especially something like you can only see inside the store, yet you still can't like do. Too strict in some places.
Okay. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. So, do you think design standards would be useful in Reading? When I'm talking about design standards, I'm talking about trying to have some standards or guidance as to what the building will look like after it's built. We can be talking about, I'm not talking about what color it should be painted, what material should be used. I'm talking about the look of the signs. I'm talking about whether or not there are windows on the front of the building instead of like a blank brick wall. I'm talking about, how big is the building in relationship to the lot that it's on. Things along those lines, architectural features. So these could be done. These could be done as design standards or guidelines in the zoning. So this question is asking, do you think that they would be useful? So there are several choices here. Yes, but only in the downtown area. Yes, but only along the major commercial roadways like Route 28. Yes, but only for residential development. Yes, for any development anywhere in Reading. No, it's not necessary, or you're not sure.
Do we take more than one choice?
This one, only one choice. Sometimes we really just want to get your sort of top priority. Okay, so about a third of you say no, it's not necessary, you're not sure. But a little more than a third of you say yes for all areas of Reading. And a quarter of you say for the major commercial roadways. Okay, what is your perception of the permitting, of the zoning process in Reading? It is difficult and discourages business. It is too easy for businesses to do what they like. The process is balanced and not a burden. It is difficult for residential use, or you're not sure. once, going twice. So half of you say it's difficult and discourages business. A quarter of you say that it's fairly balanced. Okay? And the last question, and this one you can vote twice. What are the top 2 areas of confusion or concern within the current zoning bylaw? Signs, conservation of wetlands, business districts, parking requirements, overlay districts, residential districts, planned unit development, non-conforming uses and structures, or not sure enough. Okay, we have signs and non-conforming uses and structures as the top 2 vote getters, followed by the conservation of wetlands. So, if the presumably one person who said not sure or other would like to just say whether it was something that I didn't have on the list or you weren't sure. You don't have to if you don't want to. Okay. So, we have a project website. It's run off of VHB's website. So the address is www.vhb.com/Reading-zoning. One word. So that site is live. We have some documents posted on it, but we will populate it with more. I will put this presentation on the website in the next day or so. And like I said, as we go through the process, you'll see that there's a lot more information that will be put on it. Right now there's a page, what is zoning? There's a frequently asked questions page. There's a schedule and so on and so forth. So with that, I think we'd like to take the majority of the rest of our time to open it up, see if you have any questions, see if you have any comments. Are there things that you want to tell us about the zoning, your own experience, things that you think that we should definitely look at? Maybe there are certain things that you think really work great and you don't want us to touch. We're open to get any of your feedback on any issue.
Thank you. My name is Fred Van Magnus, for those who don't know me. One of the reasons I came here, and I thank you very much for this test and quiz, is really a great deal. I've been concerned for a number of years around the Aquifer Protection District, which is section 4.8, and specifically 4.8.6.1.9. And you'll get into that probably when you get through all these regulations. However, the Aquifer Protection District was set up a number of years ago, and it's really a good thing. I really don't have a problem with having a lot of the regulations and a lot of the requirements that are in there under the Aquifer Protection District. However, the one thing that's in that 4.8619 section is a specific restriction on lot coverage of impervious surface area for people that are in that district. And the restriction is 10% or 2,500 square feet. And beyond that, you've got to spend a lot of money for a groundwater recharge system in your yard, which for someone who's going to have an addition or a swimming pool or anything in their yard can add $10,000 to $20,000 at a minimum to a project. Now, that's treating a lot of people in a zoning district grossly unfairly, in my opinion. The problem that you have with this thing in the delineation when the Weston and Sampson did the Aquifer Protection District a number of years ago is it kind of curves its way around streets. In my particular street, the Aquifer Protection Zone, if you're on my side of the street, you're in it. If you're on the other side of the street, you're not in it, which is totally ridiculous. I mean, it's defined by the center line on the roadway. And nobody did any geological surveys to determine that's where it is. There are certain areas where there's wetlands for stormwater runoff and everything else, but those aren't in protected areas within the district. So I guess the thing that I'm looking for, without changing all of section 4.8, and Gene, yeah, that's one part of it, and then the other part of it is down a little bit to your left, in there, right. That whole district was set up to protect the Ipswich River and our well fields when we had our own well system, and also the wells down off of Causeway Road that got contaminated, I believe, by the state and salt storage and were never used. And now that we're on MWRA, it's nice to protect from, you know, putting in gas stations, certain things, junkyards and all that kind of stuff in this area, because I think it's good to protect streams and rivers and things like that. But it penalizes a lot of individual people. And zoning shouldn't be that way, to penalize just because you live on a street, you're penalized. I mean, people can do, if you're in the S20 district, you can do the things that S20 districts are allowed, unless there's another overlay district. But this aquifer protection thing, I'm just asking you to, whoever's doing this, the zoning advisory committee, the CPDC, or VHB, to look at that one specific section and see if that could presumably be eliminated, or something done to that so it isn't so egregious and penalize people. And that's all I wanted to say. I would really like to see something fixed on that. And our prior town manager had said to me that we were getting to the point that we could do that because we've been on MWRA for a while, but you know, nothing has happened at this point in time. So that's all I have to say about that, and I thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that. So the town didn't decide that they were gonna create this district. It was as a result of a consent decree, it's my understanding. But what I'm hearing you say is, we need to go back to that consent decree and verify that we still need to be in compliance, and then verify if these boundaries are still correct. Is that
Right,
what you're saying?
and within that consent decree, which came about when the Ipswich River thing, with all
Right.
that was being danced around, within that, could we in fact change that one section to take out the lot coverage thing? I mean, there's certain things, and I ran up against this with my son, who was doing a project at his house in the Aquifer Protection District. He had a gravel walkway. That was counted as an impervious surface. We said, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. It's a oh no, you have to understand that at some point in time, that could become asphalt. So you get penalized and the addition gets constrained because of that. And it's just not fair.
We did change the decks, so now, it used to be, if you put a deck on, that counted too. But now if you have a deck that, you know, water's running through and so forth, that won't count against you for lot
Right.
coverage.
Right.
So that's one step in the right direction, but I hear what you're saying, you want us to take another look at it, see if we can make it easier on the homeowner.
Correct. To have a homeowner on one side of the street that wants to put on a small addition to their house, have to spend an additional $20,000 or whatever the number is,
Right.
but these are expensive, you know, Gene, as well as I do, to put in a groundwater recharge system.
Yep.
And his neighbor exactly across the street wants to do the same thing, and he's home free. That to me just doesn't seem fair. It's a fairness issue. Anyway, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Gene.
Jill Brown, political signs, one of my pet projects. I think they should be allowed larger than what we do. I think under the First Amendment of the Constitution, I should be able to put up the largest political sign that I want. Thank you.
I second that.
Hi, I'm Gina Snyder, and my concern is actually somewhat about impervious cover to make sure, because the municipal separate storm sewer system NPDES requirements we're in draft, and they're gonna come out and draft again for Massachusetts, and we're in the North Coastal District, and one of the things you have to keep track of is how much directly connected impervious area you have. I'm concerned that we'll rewrite the zoning and not take those new requirements into account. Since if we're lucky, they'll be draft by then, and we, hopefully we'll know what they are. And the impervious cover is an issue, not just in an aquifer protection district. If you look at the stormwater issues in town at the recent selectmen's meeting, where it's more than $5 million of capital work that needs to be done because of flooding issues, because things weren't built in such a way to take care of the water that is falling and running off. So I think that that's a big issue more broadly across the whole town that needs to be incorporated.
A clarification on the question. Will you, as part of the administrative input that you will offer as a consultant, will you help us develop enforcement policies that we may have to choose or not? Because a lot of the discussions that I've heard have to do with allowing something to go X way and then the owner doing something another way. So that's like an enforcement issue. That seems to be a problem in several sections. So as a consultant, have you run into this? Will you help us on the administrative portion?
Yeah, I'm assuming that enforcement will be a part of the puzzle. When I talked to the building inspector, he raised a couple of concerns along those lines. So, we'll look at the enforcement provisions as they stand now and see if there are changes that can be made to give the town more tools to make sure that things are done right and that everybody's playing by the same rules and doing so equally.
You mentioned earlier in your presentation preserving neighborhood character. And I was wondering what kind of tools are possible under that heading?
Well, I think part of it gets to an issue that we're seeing in a lot of communities where you see tear downs and much bigger houses being built, and they are out of character with the rest of the neighborhood. So, that would probably be the main example that I would give. I'm not sure if that's a huge issue here in Reading, but it's certainly an issue that we've seen. I know that it was mentioned in a couple of your planning documents, so I assume you've come up against it. So that's probably the major one. But sometimes there are other things about additions or garages or accessory structures that may come up that may conflict with the overall character of the neighborhood. To some extent, of course, neighborhood character is sort of a subjective term, so it's a little harder to regulate. But we're going to try and look at some of those.
But it also connects to impervious surfaces.
Yeah.
Virginia Adams from the Historical Commission. Great lead-in. I just wanted to understand if there are going to be more opportunities for design review within the various boards.
That's something that we'll look at. Whether it's done through a guidance or through some of the review process that various boards undertake, whether it's done through maybe the site plan review process or the special permitting process, or whether it's a separate set of standards or guidelines. Those are things that we'll put on the table when we talk about it with the Zoning Advisory Committee. My role would be to present the committee with some of the different options that are out there. I've written design guidelines for a number of different communities. I know the range of what can work and what doesn't work. So we'll talk about the various options and see if there's some consensus as to which way is the best way to go.
So as I said, I'm interested in signage, and I'm Joe Caloriso. My family owns Caloriso's Farm Stand Garden Center, and I'm here with my son Justin. We had a retail consultant come to our store. And that consultant was sponsored by the town of Reading, and she suggested having Caloriso's written on the side of the building. We have a nice high peak that faces 128 and look beautiful in the picture. And I think that would be a nice addition to our store, but the current law we're not allowed to. For my business, I think we have a lot of frontage and we have a large building, yet we're only allowed, the one sign. So I don't know if maybe linear feet of frontage and building size might be a factor in being able to have something on the building as well as a freestanding sign.
Okay.
And then my second need, I guess, as a business is I'd like to have a changeable sign that I could change, monthly or weekly or seasonally without having to go through the whole permit process as well. There are a couple of garden centers, one in Woburn, in Hughes, and one in Winchester Mahoney's that have these signs. They're nice, professionally made signs, and they change them out every month or so. And one of the concepts that the town of Reading has is to try and pull buildings closer to the buildings that are being built, closer to the street, and have parking in back. And in retail, most people see that as being a big negative because the place doesn't look alive. When you have parking in front, parking doesn't look as great as grass. But at least you have cars going in and out, see people going in and out of the building. It makes the building come alive a little bit. But my building in front actually works out pretty good most of the time because we sell our stuff outside, our customers are outside, and it looks nice from the street. But during the times that we don't have things outside, my place looks abandoned. So one of the things that would help would be that changeable sign, something that changes every once in a while, to kind of catch people's attention, to say, yeah, we're still open, we don't close down in the winter time, we're here. It would help with the whole idea of having parking in back.
I'm Justin Calorie. So government projects have a tendency of being like over budget and taking longer than expected. How confident are you that this project will not go over budget or take longer than expected?
Well, first of all, I signed a contract with a timetable on it and a dollar amount, so I'm not going to get paid any more than the contract says, so there won't be any budget issues along those lines. We're going to try and keep to the schedule. The bottom line is that we want to get this before, we're working backwards. We know that in order to get this going, we want to have this before town meeting in November 2014. So working backwards, we know that what the process is, that we have to have a certain amount of public forums, public hearings, legal public hearings with the planning board. We need to make sure there's enough time for town meeting members to, people who go to town meeting to understand what's in the changes. We need to make sure that people are really informed about what's going on. So we built that time into it as well, so that there's an outreach and education process, because it wouldn't do us any good if we spend a year working on a project like this and then it fails at town meeting because people didn't really understand it. So we built all that into it, which is why the goal is to get a final draft ready by the middle of next year in July. That gives us 4 months to do the public outreach and education to make sure that town meeting members understand what they'll be voting on in November. So that's our motivation.
All right, and my second question is, are you going to include a grandfather clause in this? I mean, any change you make, I'm sure that there are bound to be businesses that are after good under the current bylaws, but under the next.
Yeah, that's covered under state law. So
that is, you will.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's just the way state law works with respect to zoning. So we don't really even have to build anything in there for that because it's covered that way.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, again, are you going to do type-ins and scratch-out as the system generally does, or are you just going to totally abandon the whole present bylaws and write new ones as they did in 1942?
as we go through the process, I mean, the bottom line is that regardless of what we come up with as a final product, we will have to keep track of all the changes that are being made so that people understand what's going on. And then when we think about how it's presented to town meeting, there are two approaches. One is that we just go section by section and say this changes, this changes, this changes, and town meeting votes on it that way. Or what some communities have done is, while noting what all the changes are, they say we're going to throw out the old and give you this new one. And I don't have a strong feeling either way. I think it's really what makes most sense to the town in terms of presenting this in an understandable way to the town meeting.
Yeah, I'm Nancy Toomey. I'm a local architect and have worked with a lot of people in Reading and also around the surrounding areas. And one of the major issues I think Reading has is their accessory bylaws, accessory apartment bylaw, and their two-family bylaw. I think that it is extremely difficult to circumnavigate. I think it's very difficult for people to understand why they can't or can have accessory apartments. And I think it's an issue that is coming up a lot with elderly families, sandwich generation, kids coming up from college who need a place to live. And most homes in Reading don't qualify for accessory apartments. I'm not advocating that we want necessarily all of them to have them, but I think there's a better way to approach it. And there are a lot of surrounding communities that do a really nice job of integrating it into the fabric of the community. So I urge us to kind of look at that carefully and come up with something that's reasonable.
There's a good piece in the Sunday Globe this past Sunday just on that subject.
Yep.
Showed you how to lay it out and everything.
Yeah, it's really important. Very good.
Yeah, and if you have specific examples that you want to pass along, I'd be happy to take a look at them. I've done revisions to those types of bylaws in the past, and one of the points on one of the slides referred to addressing some of the new trends in planning. And the interesting statistic is that we're just seeing the first wave of the baby boomers turning 65. Every day, until that generation has turned 65, 10,000 people are going to turn 65 each and every day around the country. That's a lot of people over the next 15 to 20 years. And we have to think about ways in which those people are going to get around, where they're going to live, and so on and so forth. So those are the kinds of things that come into play, and accessory apartments may be one option that's to be looked at.
I have a dilapidated barn on my property that I've been trying to take down for the last 8 months. And I'm now in the situation where it's so dilapidated that it's putting children in direct and immediate danger. And I've really been batted all over the town trying to get this property taken down. And I guess for me and for other people going forward, I think that the process should be streamlined. 8 months later, I really feel that I shouldn't be still trying to acquire permits to take down a dilapidated barn. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at, is we need that process to go a little quicker. Like I've lost 3 home sales trying to get this barn down and sell my house at the same time, and it's really been an unbelievable burden to me and to my family, and to have the town kind of just throwing me in every other direction, trying to get it, a barn down that's really putting not only my family, but 7 other houses. It's in a very congested area, in danger. Just huge chunks of this barn fall onto our driveways, into people's yards, and now I'm going into another winter with this barn like that, with absolutely no conclusion and no end in sight, honestly, whatsoever. So hopefully coming here tonight will get me somewhere and get that process looked at, because it's really been just a hellacious, unbelievable, epic tale that people don't even believe when I tell them. And that's it. That's what I'd like looked at. Thanks.
Just to clarify, did you say that was historic?
Well, I think that has been part
That's
of the
the issue.
problem, is that they deem that, I know you have, Violet needs to go to the bathroom, so as soon as I'm done talking,
That was the-
line
okay.
that stopped the project was that they deemed that this in particular building was in a historic zone, or, I'm not really, I honestly, I think that that's what we've been
Okay.
told, and hopefully, meeting with the town manager will clarify that for me. But yeah, that it's a historic building in a historic zone, so they just halted the whole process, and have just thrown us into permit abyss that I can't get myself out of to get this thing
So
down.
you're gonna meet with the town manager, we'll see if we can't help that along.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
I own the Goddard School in Reading, which is way on the bottom of, right near where REI is, which is 129 in that whole area. And it took me 4 years and, well, my developer, many hundreds of thousands of dollars and 4 years of lost income to get the school built, because allegedly the contention was that it was on wetlands. Because there is a culvert behind my building that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers that the Wetlands Conservation Commission deemed as unbuildable. And we had to go all the way up to the state for them to designate the fact that this wasn't wetlands. And the maps and everything, the whole plans of the Army Corps and all that stuff are available. I mean, they were able to find it. And I know that every other person on this whole blocks and blocks and blocks have, you know, because it's a wetlands, nobody could put the pool in they wanted, or do the extension that they wanted, or put a shed up that they wanted, or any of those type of things. And as I said, it took me 4 years to have it built. 4 years to be allowed to build it, and that was 4 years of lost revenue, and 4 years of not being able to provide a service to the town that clearly was desperately needed. So that, what's designated goes along with the aquifer protection. It's like we probably need to look and see what's real and what's not real.
I'm John Coote, I'm an ex-ZBA member. I think the main thing about zoning is it is by nature an organic business. In other words, you cannot write a set of zoning laws which is not going to be out of date within 3 months of finishing them. I think that's a reality that you have to face. So I'm urging you not to do things which are too radical, because there's a lot in the zoning bylaws which has got there by the school of hard knocks. You know, things went in there and they were found to be unsuitable, and they later had to be modified and then modified again and modified again. And if you don't understand that history, you're likely to not put in something which is going to stand the test of time and the test of lawyers coming in with, you know, smart ways of trying to get around it. A lot of the stuff is in there for a very, very good reason. I'll give you a very simple example of this. You might think that the definition of frontage should be a very, very simple rule. Well, if you look in the Reading zoning bylaws as the definition, it isn't very simple. And it's not very simple for a very good reason. And I think unless you know what that reason is, you're likely to, as it were, throw out the baby with the bathwater and go back to a definition of frontage, which is again going to be challenged time and time and time again, and is going to have to be modified time and time and time again. So what I'm trying to emphasize is you have to have some institutional memory here to understand why certain things got in the bylaws, and if you don't understand why they're in there, you shouldn't mess around with them, you shouldn't change them, because they're there for a very good reason. And there's lots of examples in the Reading bylaws where if you change it, you will find that you're going to fall flat on your face, because they are there because they stood the test of time. That's my plea to you. Don't change things which don't have to be changed.
I just want to make one more comment. comment. One of the things I have found in some of the changes that have been proposed in the past, this kind of goes along with him, is that the town has developed in such a very organic way. There are neighborhoods that have, and my house is on one of them, have lots that are less than 10,000 square feet. So the rules that might apply for accessory garages, for example, or other items on the property wouldn't apply in my lot the same as they would for a lot on the other side of town, which is over 20,000 square feet. So I think that you have to pay close attention to how this town has developed over time. And while the zoning now says we need a 15,000 square foot lot to have a lot, there are a lot of lots that are less than 10,000 square feet. So I really urge you to not just, especially when you're talking about design guidelines, assume that those design guidelines will be consistent throughout Reading. They won't. And there has to be a good distinction between small lots and larger lots.
Again, I just want to say something about wetlands real quick. I mean, I understand the need to preserve the ecology and stuff, but I mean, at the same time, you have like, I feel like the wetland guidelines are way too strict. I mean, the amount of buffer you need between wetlands and, I mean, like what you could do around them, and it's just, it seems too strict for, I mean, like, it hurts businesses drastically, it hurts the value of property drastically. I mean, so it hurts us, so I think that needs to be changed.
So, some of the, particularly with wetlands, some of it's out of our hands because it's covered by state law, but we can look at how it's
I'm
dealt
aware
with.
of that, but some of it's also covered by,
Yeah, absolutely. Back there?
Thank you. So my name is John Sasso, ex-CPDC, current town member, meeting member. I'm not volunteering for anything. So I just want to go through a couple things. First of all, I want to echo John's comments. We probably touched a lot of the bylaw over the last probably 5 to 10 years, and there is a lot of history there. Certainly Bill could probably tell us about the last 50, 60 years. But so I definitely think it's important to look back at that history because there are a lot of changes in there that have been made with rationales that we may not all remember. And so that's, and certainly approach is another thing that sits in my mind. I'm thinking about town meeting in November, how this is going to get presented to us, like, as you mentioned earlier, and how we drag some of the town meeting members into this earlier. It's because I think if we do this on town meeting floor, forget it. It's not going to happen. So just a couple thoughts there. I do want to just touch on a few things, a couple questions as I go through it. I heard a lot of comments about signage. Signage has always been an issue, even when I was on CPDC. Have you talked to anybody on the business community here at the chamber? Have you involved, are you planning to involve any of them in that discussion?
I've reached out to some. I do need to continue to follow up. I'm waiting for responses.
I know when that piece of the bylaw was redone, maybe just before I got on CPDC, there was a whole sorts of efforts that went through, and even after everybody agreed, they all didn't like it in the end. So I just be cautionary tale there. There's a lot of updating I think can be done, but definitely needs to be considered as that's done.
And if I could just comment, in our office in Community Services, we have a database of the businesses, everyone that we've identified, and we email every notice that for every meeting that we've had so far. I think that's a couple of hundred email addresses.
Excellent.
So we do have that database. We also send out bi-weekly notes, and those bi-weekly notes advertise this meeting as well as other information. Those are 4,000 email addresses that we keep for a broad stroke of the community, but certainly a lot of businesses around.
As a side note, one of our master plan ideas back then was to try to find a way to get communication broader across the community with all these, lists and stuff. But
yeah, and I think the website would be a good tool as well.
People talked about the EPA, the stormwater requirements. I certainly, also from an impervious surface area, think that's an area that homeowners in particular are worried about in terms of their area. And maybe one of the questions there is, are there plans as part of this to, and I realize we may be somewhat in that particular area are covered by state regulations. But are there plans to make any changes from a dimensional perspective to, for example, make things that exist today more non-conforming?
We haven't looked at the dimensional regulations. At this point, we will be looking at them and seeing what, if anything, needs to be fixed or could be fixed or should be fixed, and as well as sections that shouldn't be, or dimensional regulations that shouldn't be changed for specific zoning districts. One of the consequences of making any change to the zoning bylaw is that you may create some new non-conforming uses or structures. So, that may be a consequence regardless, and it may be related to something other than dimensional regulations.
Sure.
That's part of the puzzle that we have to look at and balance with the pros and cons of the change and what its impacts might be.
The basic districts, the underlying zoning, are there any expected changes in terms of those districts at this point, in terms of their boundaries?
It's too early. I haven't really had a chance to dive into it. Really, we'll be able to talk more about that in subsequent meetings.
Another item that obviously always comes up is parking, especially when it comes to business site plan reviews. There's a, and if I'm quoting this wrong, and someone else can correct me, but there's a related to proximity to municipal lots and off-site parking. Again, that's an area that continues to, every time I think a business comes forward with a site plan review, have an issue. I just point that out as something that should be looked at. I know it would help CPDC to have some better clarity over that, and maybe to be a little bit more fair and parity with the businesses as well that do come forward. There's some discussions about accessory structures, sheds. We did a carriage house bylaw a couple of years ago, garages and offsets. That's another area where I think there's some room for improvement. And I know there are some inconsistencies in that because they've been there for a while. So that's another area. And then another area I think is the special permit versus the variance question. As a homeowner, having gone through a residential upgrade, that obviously is something that I had to deal with too. So I think while the bylaw itself may not have to be explicit, I know we put a lot of process-related things in place there, and maybe some of that can be reflected either in the regulations or also in some of the additional materials beyond that. So that's my list, but again, I definitely we'll end with please, and let's figure out a way to bring this to town meeting appropriately, because I don't want to be stuck in a 30-hour town meeting trying to figure this all out. So, drag us in, please, and it's approach. My perspective, it's always in the approach, and having information, slideshows, pictures, we found that to always work very, very well in getting the concepts across. You talked about maybe adding more of that into the zoning bylaw. I think that's a huge improvement. I know when George did some of the stuff we did downtown, we used the images for part of the 40R, and I think that worked very well. So things like that we can bring in would really help the process. Thank you.
John Jarima, I'm a current member of the zoning board. I said I wasn't going to do this, but I just have one basic question. Before I give you that question, though, zoning, to me, is a very difficult pill to swallow because it gives you a set of regulations and rules that you have to abide by if you want to do anything. So when you mention development, define development. Is it more than one house? Are you talking 2 houses or 3 houses or 7 houses? If you're talking about the 2 competing aspects of zoning, which is commercial business or industrial versus residential, what part of the town or what number of people are involved in the changes of these bylaws? The recodification of just Reading, I mean, this is a hot issue around the country, especially here in Massachusetts. Especially since now we're looking at a recodification of 40A, which is the guiding principles of zoning. So, I mean, all of this stuff is coming together at the same time, and it's very difficult. So I only have the one question for advisory committee, and that is, the town fathers, and you become part of that, have a vision for this community, for the town of Reading. What is that vision? Where are we going? Where do we see ourselves in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? As Nancy brought up, are we going to have more individuals who are looking for two-family homes or the ability to put a second family or family unit within a home? Are we looking for larger developments because now we're going to take down some of that residential and we're going to build large communities out there, self-sufficient types of communities, mixed uses, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole thing, my question for the advisory committee and the town fathers is, where are we going? Where do you see us now? And that should predicate where you're going with the zoning bylaw changes. Because if you know where you want to be and you think you've got it fixed in your own mind, if town meeting buys that, they're going to buy the changes. If they can't see why you're going to do all that, you're going to have a very difficult time marketing any change. I mean, because we came up before, as a former town meeting member, many years ago, every November we come up with new zoning changes or proposed zoning changes. And it's like pulling teeth to get them through, because people who are sitting there do not understand the big picture. So my question is to the advisory committee, what is your big picture? And how will you make the recodification of the zoning bylaws in Reading meet that?
So point, does the zoning bylaws interface with like the Americans with Disability Act? And I think in a couple of really significant areas in the town we're in violation of that, including some new development to downtown itself. And not only we're talking about people that we generally think of with disabilities very visible, but we talk about an older population. You know, cobblestones. My God, cobblestones downtown. People with walkers. Library. The library is not ADA. It's accessible if you get to the parking lot. But to get to the parking lot is not accessible. Clear violation. And we're building a new, new addition, renovating. I haven't heard anybody talk about it. Of course, we have no leadership on the human services side necessarily. But to me, that's a big issue.
George is part of the zoning advisory committee. I'll speak for myself. That fundamental question that you asked before, for me, there is only one high-level book that was created about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago. A lot of people put a lot of effort in that document. So if we're looking at zoning as a technical document, I think the master plan, with all the sections that we have written, contain the seeds of any type of answer which will rise to that level, which is not technical. I don't want to speak for other members. I don't want to be called the father of the town when I'm gone. Because the effort has happened already, and I don't think it's the role of the ZAC, the Zoning Advisory Committee, to rediscover these. If there are some of these vision statements or intents that are in these documents which will feel maybe a little outdated or not, we can certainly revise them, but they exist at a very high level. If we discover that this document needs to be updated before we go through that, it's going to come right up into the next public meetings and we will know. But I already feel bad. It's just saying that I'm not going to go through the process you're suggesting, to lose my sleep and figure out what the values of the fathers are and how I'm part of that continuum.
I am Dave Tuttle. I'm one of the worst, a member of the CPDC and the Zoning Advisory Committee. And there's a couple of things that, the word recodification has come up a couple of times. and we've mentioned it amongst ourselves about our own zoning bylaw. Just a reminder that recodification is a very specific state mandated word that means fix the language, do not change any of the rules. So recodifying 40A, the state law, has no impact on the rules. It means they fix the language. They may not live up to that. We may, we've got to do the work that we're doing in two pieces. One is the recodification, make it clear, make sure that we're saying what we think we're saying, but in that step, you don't change any of the rules. Separately, we're re-examining the rules. And unfortunately, zoning is not for you. Zoning protects your neighbors. It's fair because everybody has the same rules in the same district, in the same vicinity. The rules that apply to a 10,000 square foot lot are different than the rules that apply to a 20,000 square foot lot. But this 10 is the same as that 10, is the same as that 10. This 20 is the same as that 20, the same as that 20. And one of the problems with zoning is that when you come up against it as an individual, it's restrictive, it changes the value of your property because it restricts what you can do. I've been on both sides of that, and all of us will be from time to time. But the main purpose of it is the town structure, protect your neighbors. You don't want the 80 apartment buildings a foot from your property line. That's one of the things that zoning provides. And yeah, it's a pain in the neck, but we spend an awful lot of time on it. I mean, I'm part of the history of it at this point. I've been there most of 10 years. And it needs fixing. We're going to try and do that.
Anything else? I just like to urge you as you go through this process to remember our rights, not just like especially the First Amendment rights, but really all of our rights, and that those rights don't apply just to residential areas that people live in, but that people also own businesses, and that those rights are extended to businesses because people own them. I mean, yes, there does need to be some regulation, but remember our right to free speech. And I mean, for some of us, I think that sometimes the town government is difficult to do that.
Yes. Anything else?
Just in the processes I've gone through, a lot of times I've been in front of a board and felt like the board really wanted to, we were on the same page, and they really wanted to allow me to do what made sense. And I think a lot of times they were restricting what they were allowed to do. So I don't know if there's a way to, have some flexibility in certain places. And I can't even begin to suggest where that might be, where common sense can really make a difference in the decision.
Yeah, I mean, there are places where zoning bylaw could be a little bit more flexible rather than prescriptive. So, we'll look at that where it makes sense to do that. And then, there's always places where, and this may be what you ran up against, where either the wording of the bylaw is such that even if the board thought that you had a good idea, their hands were tied just because of the way it was written, or there are things in state law that we just don't have any control over, because the State Zoning Act is 40 years old, and we've been trying to fix that for a long time too. So.
Yeah, Will Finch, I'm on the Conservation Commission now. Haven't been forever, but we did go through a review of the bylaws and regulations a little over a year ago. It took about a year to do it. The main thrust was to make it as close to the state regulations as possible, but also maintaining some of our local control, what we felt were important issues. As far as the Goddard School, I wasn't on the commission for all of that process, or maybe any of it, but that was, the stream by that school was a river, and so the commission was trying to work, you know, basically comply with the State River Protection Act.
It actually wasn't.
It was ruled not a river later as part of the court case. It was actually ruled a ditch, I believe, or a drainage ditch subsequently. But originally it was defined as a river, so that was the issue there. And also the other third point is there was a wetland district in the zoning regulations or bylaw, which Conservation Commission recommended be eliminated because it doesn't define, it's not a legal definition of wetlands. It can't be used in the permitting process, so we never did. The only way to do that is to be on the ground, making observations of water table and plant life that's living there. And you can't use the GIS layer either that the state provides us, because that's not accurate. You have to be on the ground. And that's why it does take time reviewing each permit, if it is near a wetlands, to get a good handle on the situation.
I wanted to sort of second what Mr. Tuttle said, because as a town meeting member, Jean invited us to come, and Reading Notes invited us to come, but there are a lot of people here who came for very specific issues, which is what always happens. And even at town meeting, you get people saying, well, I don't want my church to have to comply with parking regulations. You know, and it's the broad picture gets completely lost. And I have been impacted by my neighbors not conforming to zoning, so I do know what it feels like as a resident who is supposed to be protected. So don't forget that side of the picture, because what you get is people with, you know, why would you come to a meeting on a freezing cold night unless you have skin in the game? So just keep that in mind.
As a response to that, I don't have any personal stake in this. However, I believe that it's very important for the rights of citizens to be shown. So I don't come here for a specific issue. I come here because of my rights.
Anything else? Okay. Okay, we got several sheets worth of notes, so we have a lot to talk about as we get into the process.
I'm Marcy West. I'm the chair of the Zoning Advisory Committee, and I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight, because I do appreciate that everybody did come. We were wondering how many people we might have, and I think this is a great showing, so it's super. We do have regular meetings. We have a schedule that's planned from now through November. Jean, is that schedule on our website? I'm not sure.
It will be if it isn't. I just wanted to make sure that we posted the latest.
Let's put the schedule out there, because that way if people do want to come, they're on Mondays and Wednesdays alternating, and it says when there are public forums, so people can plan ahead if they want to and come. And so I would encourage you to make your concerns known, because it is, we want to make sure we protect our town, but we do need to rewrite what's been there since 1942 and then add it on to piecemeal, so that it's a little bit easier to understand. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, and I do need these back.
They try to